Being happy is hard.
One of the things that I recommend is having a reverse bucket list. Biggest mistake young people listening to us make is thinking they have good and bad feelings. There's no such thing as bad feelings. People who become business leaders, they're not normal. You get more dopamine when you think about something you want to go get than when you actually get the thing. Your suffering is unbelievably sacred. Pain elimination is a huge mistake.
When I hear a teenager say, I want to be an influencer, it's about the same as saying I want to be a porn star. What's the recipe for being a happy striver?
You're listening to The Human Upgrade with Dave Asprey.
This is a live episode recorded here at my studios in Austin, Texas. And our guest today is a world leader in happiness.
I'm a professor of happiness.
And neuroscience and business and a bunch of other things. He is going to teach us today what happiness is and what it isn't and what you can do to be happier. And this is a deeply personal episode for me because, in my 20s, I thought making money would make me happy. I was very convinced. So I made $6 million when I was 26. Lost it when I was 28. And when I was sitting there on $6 million, I looked at a friend and said, I'll be happy when I have 10. And I tried the same thing in Entrepreneur Magazine when I'm 23. Didn't make me happy. Tried getting married in my 20s briefly. Didn't make me happy. I'm like, damn, being happy is hard. In fact, it's really hard. So what would happen if you just studied it and then we got to learn from someone who spent decades looking at this, especially for high performers? And you might have heard of the book co-authored with Oprah called Build the Life You Want. Well, the co-author and Harvard professor Arthur Brooks is here in the studio. Arthur, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dave. Long-time follower, first-time guest.
Wow. Well, it's my fault that this is your first time on because I've been a fan of your work forever.
Thanks. Likewise.
Finally, we get to interview you. So
Likewise.
This is so fun.
It's kind of an interesting time where academics and practitioners of human performance actually are regularly meeting each other.
Yeah.
A few decades ago, it would have been impossible. Writing for academic journals, you would never actually meet the people that are on the ground starting the companies and trying to upgrade the human person. But now we get to work together.
Yeah. It's one of the reasons that I started like the biohacking word and then the movement was I wanted to bring in the neuroscientists and the Navy SEALs and the bodybuilders
Right.
and the longevity guys. Like, let's all sit down and like swap notes.
Exactly.
And Andrew Huberman was on before he had a podcast. Peter Attia before he had a podcast. So I've been like finding these interesting people and saying, I don't care if you practice, if you're a high performer who's done something, or if you're an academic, like how do we mix and match?
Yeah. And now at this point, people like Huberman or me, we're academics, but at the same time, we're trying to reach out in the spirit of public education so we can share these big ideas with people in ordinary life. Now, Huberman and me too, we specialize in strivers. We specialize in the people that are going to watch and listen to this program because they want the best possible life that they can build, and they want their life to extend as long as they can so they can have more adventures. And the interesting thing about the work that I'm trying to do is that you're the expert in how to live a long time. I'm an expert in why to live a long time. Yes. And those are the two questions you really need to answer if you're going to have the best life.
In the arc of my books, it was, how do you get your energy back? That was the Bulletproof Diet one. And then how do you make your brain work all the way was the next one. And then, okay, now that you like your life, I surveyed about 400 guests on the show to come up with some common elements. That was called Game Changers. Sort of like, let's do it. And then how do I have a lot more, which was longevity. And after that, it's been nuances. And the next one coming up is called Heavily Meditated.
Oh, I can't wait. When's it coming out?
It comes out in Q1, I think in May, end of April.
May of 25.
Yeah.
Nice. Can't wait.
I'll send you a copy.
Yeah.
And you have a book coming up as well, right?
The next book's coming out in 2026. Okay. In the first quarter of 2026 called The Meaning of Your Life and How to Find It Before It's Too Late.
That's a cool name. Why don't you come back on the show when that happens?
I will do that to date.
I want to ask you some questions that maybe you haven't heard before.
Oh boy. I bet you will.
I want to make like a 7th grade joke now and I'm not going to. So you're a classical musician.
Yeah, I was.
You were trained in that.
Mm-hmm.
What's the role of music in happiness and all the rest of the work you do?
So music is interesting because what it does is it connects you to who you are and the emotions that you're experiencing more intensely. So music doesn't make you happier per se. Music can help you understand your emotions and connect you to your limbic system in a way that that goes way beyond what your prefrontal cortex can facilitate on its own. So you find, for example, that if you're sad, you want to listen to sad music. You have a bad breakup, you listen to sad songs. The reason is because that helps you understand the activity that's occurring in the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex of your limbic system. That music will make you put into perspective what's happening below your level of consciousness, and you'll be able to recover more quickly.
Wow. I'm remembering back in high school, I broke up with a girl, or she broke up with me. And I called the radio station. By the way, if you're not my age, that's how you used to just go to Spotify and look up the song. You had to call.
What is this radio station of which you speak?
Exactly. And I'm like, can you play that Phil Collins song? It says, I don't care anymore. I don't know its name.
My name all over the place. I don't care anymore.
That's what was going on.
Yeah,
it was going on. You were able to put in perspective these feelings that you're having. Now, all of our emotions produced in the limbic system of the brain, they're produced in response to signals that we're detecting in our environment. And some of them are signals of threat, some of opportunity. Negative emotions basically say there's something out there that you don't want because it's bad for you. Sadness says you're being separated from something or someone that you like or love, and you should be averse to that. And so this sadness is really, really uncomfortable. It's supposed to be, because if you didn't have any sadness, you'd be friendless, fired, alone, you'd be a hermit. And there are all kinds of things that would make it hard for you to thrive and survive. So that's what sadness is, a defense against aloneness is the way that this works. But you have to get over the grief. And so one of the ways you get over the grief is metacognitively, is understanding the nature of the emotion, putting it into perspective. And sad music helps you do that. Happy music actually helps you understand the nature of the joy that you're feeling. That's what music is, an enhancement to our for our brain processes below our level of consciousness.
I'm hearing so much of the language of biohacking and then some in this world is, okay, your body's taking signals from the environment all the time, and vibration, which is music and sound.
Right.
It's a signal.
Right.
Of course it's going to do something to you, and you might not be consciously aware of what it does.
Right.
Or in my case, maybe I was a little bit consciously aware, but when you study it the way you have, oh. And then you have guys like Stephen Porges, the follower of polybagel theory. He's a friend who's been on the show a couple of times. He's carefully constructing music to radically shift brain states, even out of trauma states. And Rick Rubin's been on the show talking actually also in a similar way to you about the role of music and art in creating emotion. It's supposed to make you feel, not think.
Right.
How do you explain the difference between feeling and thinking to someone who's 20 years old?
Yeah. So I usually try, I've heard you talk about this before too, the theory of the triune brain.
Yeah.
So the triune brain is organized along evolutionary lines. The oldest part of the brain is what we would call the detection system, or the reptilian brain. Right. It's mostly the brainstem and the cerebellum, the stuff in the back of your head. That detects things that are going on around you way below your level of consciousness. And a snake and lizard can do it as well. That's all about threats and opportunities.
So it works for politicians.
Yeah, all of us, even them. The second level is newer, evolved more than between 2 and 40 million years ago. That's the limbic system. And the detections that you get of threats and opportunities go to the limbic system, where they're translated into emotions. That's when emotions are made. Now, the biggest mistake young people listening to us make is thinking they have good and bad feelings. There's no such thing as bad feelings. There's positive and negative emotions, which are data telling you what's going on around you. And then that data are sent to the third system, the newest system, the prefrontal cortex, the C-suite of your brain, which is about 250,000 years old. And there you take those emotions and say, okay, what does that mean? What happened? What should I do? Now that's if things are going right. Reactive people don't make that third link. So when I'm talking to young people, I say, if you want to have managerial control over your life, you have to have managerial control over your feelings. And the way to do that is putting space between what you feel and what you decide to do. And that's a whole bunch of metacognitive techniques like Vipassana meditation and journaling and prayer of petition and all of these different things that humans have developed to put as much space as possible. By the way, counting to 10 when you're angry before you answer is a metacognitive technique. Yeah. And all that is doing is letting the signals have a chance to catch up. So your prefrontal cortex can say, oh, Dave is feeling a little angry right now. Wonder what just happened. How does Dave choose to act according to the stimulus? And you stop feeling like your emotions are inevitably going to affect your actions, and you stop seeing them as good or bad when you can do this. That's how I talk to young people about it, including my kids, and sometimes they listen.
Exactly. Well, let's go there. Why are kids less likely to listen to their parents?
one of the reasons is that the parents don't have as much credibility as they should, because they've seen not just the good, wise things, they've also seen the foibles and problems and their complete reactivity as well. So, my students never actually see me reacting to my feelings in an unproductive way, but my adult children have. They've seen me lose my temper. They've seen me say things I shouldn't about other people. They've seen me in a profoundly human state.
Wow.
A limbic state. And the result of that is that it shakes their confidence in my ability to be wise all the time.
I've also read some things that say that somewhere around 7 years old, kids feel like you're not infallible.
Right.
And then they feel like you deceived them into believing you were infallible because they believed that, even though you didn't tell them you were infallible.
Right.
How much of that sort of you betrayed me by tricking me that you couldn't make a mistake?
The biggest problem with that is actually the dislocation between what you say and what they see. So a lot of people ask me, how do I, here's a classic case. Religious people will ask me, how do I raise my kids so they will stay in the faith? So religious Jews will ask me this. I'm a Catholic. A lot of my Catholic friends will ask me this. I want my kids to practice the faith. What do I do? I said, it does not matter what you say. All that matters is what they see. So I'll give you an example. This is especially true for boys. Boys are looking at their dads all the time, and their father is the physically most imposing person that they've ever seen. I thought my dad was so strong he could lift the corner of the house. He was a math professor. He could not. Right? And my dad was a proud man, and he never would have bowed the knee to any other person. But my dad was on his knees on Sunday in front of a bigger power, some majesty that I couldn't quite understand. And so I said, that's what it means to be a big, strong man, is to bow the knee to no other man but to bow before the Lord. That's what it meant to me. And so the result of that was I always had that picture. I had that image in my mind. Now the problem comes if my dad does one thing and says another. So my dad says, go to church, but he doesn't. He says, be kind to others, but he's not. Right. If he says, don't be a drunk, but he is. That's where the problems really come in, and people lose a lot of respect and confidence in their parents.
One of the biggest, we'll call it parenting hacks, although not everything's a hack, that I found is if I really want my kids to hear something, I can go to any of my friends who they also talk to and say, you mind putting a good word in?
Yeah.
And then when they hear it from someone besides me,
Right.
it's like manna from heaven.
Right.
But it's almost like it's invisible.
Yeah. And it must be like that for your kids, because your kids, it must be weird being Dave Asprey's kid, by the way.
I think it is. And I love my kids. I think they're profoundly normal.
Yeah. But do their friends know who you are?
I think a few of them have Googled me, but I don't think
Yeah.
it's a big deal. I've asked them about it. They said, yeah, most people don't really pay attention to it.
Well, most of your audience is actually strivers who are a little older than your kids, of course. People in their 20s and
They're
30s.
a little older, yeah. It was
Yeah,
24 to 54 is where most of it.
But there are pretty interesting studies on the burden of being the child of a highly accomplished individual. That turns out to be tricky, because there are really two things that you want. You want, especially for young males, what they want most in life is the pride of their father and the admiration of their partner. Those are the two things they really, really want. I want my dad to be proud of me. I want my wife to admire me. Right. And that's evolved. Of course, that's evolved. That's like you want your dad to say, that's my boy, he's better than me. Because your son is the only man you've ever met that you want to be superior to you, if you're a good man. And you want your partner to say, that is an incredibly big gazelle that you just dragged in. That's going to feed our family for like 3 weeks. You're so strong. We're evolved to want that, because that's, we're raised, Homo sapiens is a tropical creature built to live in kin-based hierarchies. And some of that we can get away from. We can live in cold climates, but we're not going to get away from kin-based hierarchies. And that means that we're going to be looking for these particular signals. So men and women want certain things primevally, notwithstanding all these, how we talk about society today and the way that we've changed. In these ways that we haven't. So the result is it's tricky if you're a kid, because, you want your dad to honestly be proud of you in a way where you say, wow, I couldn't have done that. There's nothing that feels better for a child than your parents saying, you're doing this thing I could never do.
Isn't pride one of the 7 deadly sins?
It is. It's funny because pride is weird, because when we talk about pride, and it really comes from Dante, right? Yeah. This comes from from Dante's Inferno. And the deadliest of the deadly sins is the bottom of Mount Purgatory, where he's going down with Virgil for sin, worse sin, worse sin. At the very bottom, the pit of hell, he finds Satan. And Satan is not in a pool of fire with brimstone. Satan is frozen up to his waist in a lake of ice, writhing in pain, and keeping the ice frozen and thus himself immobile by the flapping fruitlessly of his wings to escape. And that represents pride. You know, his pride is he's only thinking about himself and he's only trying to escape and he's making the ice worse and freezing himself. And he doesn't even notice that Dante and Virgil are looking at him. Wow. And that's kind of what it is. And so that's really what it is. It's too much attention to yourself. So being proud of your child doesn't count.
See, this is an important lesson. I think it shapes how people become strivers later in life.
Yeah.
For a long time, I would just tell my kids, I'm grateful, I'm happy, I'm impressed. And I wouldn't say proud because it has a lot of negative connotations. And in the last few years, talking with some parenting experts, I'm like, I am proud of my kids, but I'm not proud because of my ego. I'm just so profoundly impressed with what they're doing. I'm happy to say it because it is what I feel, but it's not like, look what I did. It's like, look what you did.
The key thing is going to be, so your kids are a little younger than mine. Your kids are 15 and 17?
Yeah.
Yeah. My kids are 21, 24, and 26.
Okay.
And they're now doing things I couldn't do.
That's so cool.
And that's what you got to focus on. So I have, one son who's a data scientist, and he's doing large language models and then using advanced statistical techniques to actually comb through data in companies to find commonalities about, job function and contracts and find ways to streamline the corporation so we can do new things we never known we could do before.
You mean like fire half the McKinsey consultants?
No. Well, maybe. I don't know. But it's amazing. It's actually, so the key thing with him, he doesn't need me to say, I'm proud of you, son.
Yeah.
He needs me to be authentically amazed, which I am.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd have a son who was a sniper, who was a sniper in the Marine Corps. He's a special operator and scout sniper in the Marine Corps. And now he's in civilian life, managing a construction company. He's 24, married, has a kid. And last week I went to his house. He bought his first house at 24.
That's impressive.
It is.
Especially in this economy.
Yeah, yeah. And in Northern Virginia, which is expensive. And I was at his house and he's building a porch on his house. I can't build a porch. I mean, I can't build a porch. I wish I could build a porch.
I can. It just falls down in a year.
But it's amazing. And I was looking at it. I said, Carlos, how did you know how to do this? And he said, well, I work for a construction company, Dad, and I watch the trades do it all day. And I watched 4 YouTube videos on it and I know how to do it. And I was authentically amazed. And the thing, I just saw the look on his face when he saw that his dad was amazed because he's doing something well that I could never do.
Wow.
And so that's the key. If you really want to build your kids up, don't give them some line. I'm proud of you, son, for being such a hard worker. No, find what they're incredibly good at and admire it with authentic amazement, and they'll glow.
So it's admiration and amazement versus pride.
Yep.
Okay. That's some powerful stuff. If you could go back to yourself when you were 20, give yourself one single piece of advice, given all the stuff you know now, what would you say?
I would have developed my intellectual life better, more. And part of the reason is because I was a classical musician.
Mm-hmm.
All I wanted to do was to be the world's greatest French horn player, which is a pretty esoteric thing. I mean, only in America, right?
Lots of big money in that.
Yeah. Yeah. When I was 20, I was not going to the dentist because I didn't have healthcare coverage and I needed to go to the dentist. But I wanted to be the world's greatest French horn player. And what I didn't realize is that what I wanted was not to be the world's greatest French horn player. What I wanted to do was to learn all about the world and achieve some distinction on the basis of doing something that was generative for the rest of the world. I didn't actually know what I wanted to do. I would have gone back and said, look, your aperture is too small, man. It's like this little thing about playing the Mozart Fourth Horn Concerto better than any other French horn player in the world. That's too little. You need to open that up. You need to learn more things. You need to see the world in all of its majesty. And it took me a long time to figure that out. I didn't wind up going to college until I was in my late 20s.
Wow.
And then I started taking classes and things I didn't know I was interested in, and my mind was completely blown.
I've come across quite a few studies showing that breathing affects the nervous system, but specifically playing instruments, brass instruments or wood instruments, the ones you have to regulate your breathing through. Do you think you were regulating your nervous system unconsciously by being so into the French horn?
No doubt. I have no doubt that I was. But and it's so much that you learn. I mean, at some point, I'll write a book called How to Play the French Horn. That's not about how to play the French horn, because everything I learned about life, I learned about success, I learned about how to regulate myself as a person, came from becoming a French horn player. From the physiology of it, just to the discipline that comes with it, where it's again and again and do it again and do it again. Slow it down, listen to your tapes, memorize the beginning and the ending when you're going to be most nervous. I mean, this is how I do 150 public speeches a year now on top of my teaching at the university. And I when I'm working out a new talk, I work it out with the same mastery that I learned when I was learning how to play the French horn. Plus, I can actually regulate my breath. So no matter how nervous I am in front of whatever audience it is, I know I'm going to be able to perform.
Do you still get nervous in going in front of an audience?
Not exactly.
Yeah,
Not
I don't see
exactly.
that in you.
I was more nervous as a French horn player. I had more stage fright as a French horn player. You know, everything in life is easy when you're not holding a horn.
I wouldn't know.
Yeah, I know. Do you? Do you get nervous?
Not in the slightest.
Not at all.
Yeah.
And part of it is because you actually have mastery over the machine, right?
Yeah.
That's not an emotional thing. That's biological as much as anything else.
It's biological. I had Asperger's syndrome when I was younger. And when I was about 30, I'm like, oh man, there's a signal and all that noise below the neck. I guess I'll have to figure out what to do with it. So between neurofeedback from my leadership neurofeedback company, 6 months of looking at my brainwaves and learning how to manipulate them, and then learning how to change my heart rate variability. If I was feeling nervous before I went on stage, I would just change my state. And I do this before I go out. And I remember the first time I was going out on Tony Robbins' stage. It was 15,000 people in the stadium, which was the biggest audience I'd spoken to at the time. So I go out there and they're supposed to play an intro reel for me. And somebody didn't do it. So all of a sudden they're like, here you go. And I'm like, okay, I'm good
luck to you.
This is great. I think if I'd have had my Aura ring back then, my heart rate wouldn't have even changed. I got
Yes.
And I was afterwards going, I just genuinely want to be doing this.
Yeah.
It did take me a long time to get there. My first talk in my early 20s about, the Web 1.0, in the very beginnings of the browser, I don't remember what I said. I was terrified. But it's one of those things where it's just my body doing stupid shit. I think it's just advanced metacognition with real-time feedback. After a while, you just get like, okay, it is what it is.
When you come to understand that psychology is biology, it's incredibly empowering. Now, of course, you have to learn more because you have to learn how to self-regulate the biology. And some of the things you can't. I mean, if you're throwing up and you have the flu, well, good luck to you. Don't do the gig is what it comes down to. But I think back to before I knew a lot of what I know now. I mean, I fell off the stage during a speech one time at Carnegie Hall.
Oh, no.
When I was 22. And it's because I wasn't a public speaker. I was a French horn player. And I was speaking to the audience and my knees were knocking together. I mean, I was playing this incredibly hard repertoire as a French horn player, relatively effortlessly. But I had to talk to the audience, and that's what freaked me out.
Wow.
And I wasn't paying attention. I got too close to the edge and I fell 6 feet off the front of the stage into the audience. It was terrible. It was probably the worst night of my career at that point. It got worse after that.
You can just turn into a stage dive and act like you were cool.
Well, yeah, actually, it's interesting you say that because that's very adroit of you. Because I remember as I was falling, thinking, because time slows down. And there's a whole lot of neuroscience about why time feels like it slows down. Your life flashing before your eyes, kind of. And I thought, okay, how am I going to make this not look stupid? And I hit the ground. Everybody gasps, and I jump up and say, I'm okay, folks. I was not okay. I mean, my instrument is all wrecked. My elbow is swelling up. I mean, it was not great.
I've had quite a few friends over the years who do get a lot of stage fright.
Yeah.
And, I'll teach them some of the breathing things and whatnot. I can teach them how to upregulate energy production so you have enough energy to overcome the stress. And after that, take a beta blocker.
Yeah, no, a beta blocker, the first generation beta blockers like Inderal and low pressor and all that, those are incredibly effective.
Yeah.
Incredibly effective for lowering the physical. What it does is just, it slices through the epinephrine boost that you're getting.
Yeah. So your adrenaline can't take any action on your body. So your body says, you're going to die.
Yeah.
But the parts of your body that receive the I'm going to die hormone, they don't hear it. So then you don't get the physiological effects.
Right.
And then you don't snap out of your prefrontal cortex.
Right.
And you're still in charge.
Yeah.
I've never had to use it, but I've seen it radically change some people's lives.
Yeah, for sure. I actually use beta blockers occasionally as a musician, but I've never done it as a public speaker. Part of the reason is I want all the energy and I'm not debilitated by the nerves.
Yeah.
So
And I've heard the same thing. More musicians use it than speakers, because if you're on stage and your adrenaline's flat and you get a hostile question, you can't rise up the way you need to. So
that's right. That becomes a problem. And when you're playing the violin in the French horn or the oboe or something, you don't want a dry mouth, and you certainly don't want to be shaking.
Oh God!
I mean, that'll just ruin the physical domination you have with your fine motor skills.
Right, because you're trying to hold your diaphragm.
Yeah,
that would be
totally. I mean, what'll happen for most people, the only reason that most people would need a beta blocker for speaking is the first 90 seconds.
Yeah.
But you can actually work through that without the drugs for most people. And the way to do that is by memorizing your first 90 seconds.
Oh, that's smart.
Yeah. Just memorize exactly what you're going to say. And don't get up there with all the throat clearing and wasting time. And I'm so grateful to be here and calling out all your friends. You're just losing the audience when you're doing that. So just have it right out of the cannon. And if you do that, then boom, you're done. You wouldn't be nervous by after 2 minutes anyway.
Armra colostrum is a must-have. This isn't just another supplement. It is colostrum, which is upgraded to boost your immune system and your gut health. Armra is great because it comes from first milking colostrum, which means it has more than 200 functional nutrients. That includes immunoglobulins, growth factors, and peptides that specifically protect your gut lining. You can expect cellular defense and energy on a new level. Since I've added Armra to my stack, I have definitely seen faster recovery, especially during travel, better immune resilience, and more mental clarity. Clinical studies show that colostrum reduces gut inflammation and supports muscle mass. And it turns out I have both of those, but my gut inflammation is far better than it used to be. This is nature's original superfood. It's potent, it's clean, and I think you want to try it. Head to tryarmra.com and use code DAVE. They'll give you 15% off.
You ever chat with Lieutenant Colonel Grossman?
I haven't.
He's a guy who wrote On Combat and On Killing.
Oh, yeah.
And studied the neurophysiology of first responders, which is exactly what we're talking about here. One of the most fascinating interviews I've done. And he says, well, here's what happens if you're on a SWAT team. Here's what happens if you're a fireman going into the World Trade Centers or something.
Right.
And he explains how you drop out of your conscious thinking into your training.
Right.
And what you just said there, well, memorize it. You're going to drop out of your conscious thinking. You're going to do what you memorized. The stress gets done, and then you go into
You run the tape. And so that introductory tape that freaked you out, or could have freaked you out for that Tony Robbins stage that you had, you run your own introductory tape.
I normally do, but they didn't run it.
No, but my point is it's in your head. The first 90 seconds of your talk is your introductory
I don't
tape.
even go onto the stage. Yeah. I just stand back there, and at the end, please welcome Dave Asprey. I come out, and I'm just good to go.
Yeah. But for people who are less experienced as speakers, make sure you got your bump tape. And then in your mind, and you just run that when you get out on stage. It comes out of your mouth.
Good.
Yeah,
and I did for years. I've done a lot of speaker training because I gave keynotes for public companies before I became a biohacker. So I was well trained. And
that's good practice.
I used to go through, and every slide there's exactly beat points. You know that?
Yeah.
Just that one day, I'm like, I know the content so well that I am fully capable of not knowing what I'm going to say going on stage and doing a standing ovation. I still know what I'm going to say on stage because I'm good at what I do. But if it was a pinch hit, I know it's in there. And I developed this deep trust that I already know. And that's what creates the piece.
Right.
And
you got that from reps. And there's actually no substitute for reps. Yeah, so one of the things, it really helped. When I was trying to actually get much better public speaking, I took an engagement with a company, and I was giving a relatively technical presentation, and they sent me out to the client, said, you want to do some of these things for $1,000 a speech plus a coach class ticket. I took 50.
Wow.
I took 50 in a year and less than a year. And I was going to, I was going to Duluth, I was going to Albuquerque, I was going to these places, these runouts, but I got reps and reps and reps. And I learned a lot. I mean, I learned a lot about public speaking. So for example, and so do I, but most people when they're starting out don't, that you can't keep people's attention neurocognitively for more than 6 or 7 minutes, especially if you're trying to build toward a particular point. You got to let them off the bike for 90 to 120 seconds every 6 or 7 minutes. And so that's why you have everything modularized in a talk that you're giving. And every 6 or 7 minutes, you stop and you have a pretext. You tell a joke. You say, I just saw this study. It's not related, but it's blowing my mind. I got to share it. Or let me tell you something about one of my kids. And that's 90 to 120 seconds, and you clear their palate a little bit, and then they get back on the bike. And that's one of the things that you learn, but you only get that from reps.
I think you're right. And there's probably a way of getting it from fewer reps by increasing neuroplasticity. So you might want to microdose while you do your reps, as long as you don't over microdose.
Yeah, I know. It's
I've
like,
done that.
make sure you know what you're
So
doing.
there's the Austin microdose where people say, I'm like, no, you took a quarter dose. That was not a microdose. You're at a party. That's good.
You're actually
allowed.
tripping.
Yeah, if you can feel the microdose, it wasn't a microdose. But so the 10,000 hour rule, you can probably bend it as long as you increase blood flow and neuroplasticity.
Yeah. It's in the wrong hands, that could be a problem. The one nice thing is that mastery through reps always works.
It does. And it's good if the reps are with good form.
Yeah.
And for me, I realized I sucked at public speaking after I gave my first talk to 1,000 people, and I was maybe 24. So I started teaching, and I ran the web and internet engineering program at the University of California, Santa Cruz for about 5 years. So I taught 3 or 4 nights a week for 3 hours. And you can't have stage fright if you've got that number of hours in front of 50 people.
I know.
Especially when they're all better educated than you. So that solved it for me. And if I had not done that, I wouldn't have learned how to learn, because I had to learn my materials to teach while I was busy.
Right.
And then I had to learn how to take what I learned and do it. And people, how can you explain all these medical? It's because I had to learn how to turbo learn and translate and explain over and over and over.
Yeah. And you're doing it when you were young too, right?
Yeah.
Which is unusual, because that's much easier to do when you have high levels of crystallized intelligence, which is the ability to synthesize a lot of information quickly and see patterns. That usually happens after 40. That's when your brain is ideally suited toward it. And it's actually highest in your 50s, 60s, and 70s, your crystallized intelligence. Yeah, no, it's unbelievable. I didn't believe it until I started experiencing it. I'm a much better teacher than I was when I was 30. Much better. I can lecture now on topics that are pretty new to me, using pretty rich metaphor. And the reason for that is because I have higher levels of crystallized intelligence, which is to say I know a lot more stuff. I can recognize patterns. I can put ideas together into a synthesis. That's hard when you're 30 or 35.
Not if you had Asperger's.
It's one of the gifts.
If you had autism or Asperger's, it means your brain was operating with much less power than normal brains. So it had to force the most efficient algorithms for pattern detection. And it means that your nervous system was all staticky, because you couldn't really get good sensory input. But if you restore power and then clean up the nervous system, you still have efficient algorithms. And that's why sometimes I can just see things, because I suffered a lot. You do not want to have any of that stuff. But the gift of it is pattern recognition.
Yeah, I mean, it's so people, a lot of this new science, I'm sure you know it better than I do, because I'm not on the spectrum at all, but overdeveloped left hemisphere of the brain and a weaker corpus callosum. So there's less communication between the right and left hemispheres. And so the master hemisphere is the right, asking all the questions. The left hemisphere is the analysis. This is the emissary. And the emissary is in charge, and you're not getting signals going back and forth between the two halves. And that's the problem. Is that comport with your experience?
Well, there isn't a smaller corpus callosum in most autism that I've seen. But my mother actually had her corpus callosum
Severed? That's crazy.
By Stanford
back in the day
to help with epilepsy. And it was quite interesting. The first year after that, she would answer the phone with her stomach for some reason. It wasn't fully severed, but I don't think it did good things for her.
Yeah. Those were not successful procedures by and large.
No.
Yeah.
And what I've seen in bringing people through 40 years of Zen is we're doing EEG brain maps. So we're comparing their brains to a set of average brains, and we can compare them to other high-performing brains. And if they're not communicating between the hemispheres, it's not just like the left isn't talking to the right. It's that this one little area isn't talking to this other area.
Right.
Or it's talking at delta, but it's not talking at beta. So it's almost like there's a concert that's playing differently in each person's brain. And when you see hot or cold areas of connectivity, and you just show the brain that, it'll radically shift that. And when you're done and you look at their cue, there's no asymmetry between not just the left and right, but between the front right and the back left, or the front right and the back right. And for me, I did not have this brain. I built it. It was pretty scrambled when I started.
Yeah. That's pretty interesting. And the knowledge was incredibly helpful to you. Most people don't have it.
Actually, I had a lot of fear motivation early on, because I wanted to be a CTO. I was a CTO, at least type of thing. And I wouldn't hire myself because my brain is just trash. Like, it's not working. And one of Daniel Amen's A psychiatrist said, when he saw my brain scan when I was going to Wharton, he's like, inside your brain is total chaos. I don't know how you're standing here in front of me. You have the best camouflage I've ever seen.
Wow.
I think a lot of business leaders have camouflage.
Yeah.
Because I was running technology strategic planning for a publicly traded tech company for Exodus Communications. So, I got to attend board meetings before I was 30, couldn't speak, but I could listen. And I'm doing all this badass stuff, but inside I'm like, I'm going to die. I'm going to die. I can't remember anything. And just profound tiredness. How common do you think that is amongst executives today?
A lot. It actually does a lot. I mean, it's people who become business leaders, and particularly in highly complicated sectors, they're not normal. How shall I put it? They're not normal people. Not just that they have extraordinary ability, which many do. They have high cognitive ability, et cetera. Most people don't want to do that. Most people actually don't want to be a striver per se. And there's a good reason for that. To be a striver, you actually have to make unbelievable amounts of sacrifices, mostly your happiness.
More than most people will ever understand.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, there's an old axiom in the business of the science of happiness, which is woe be to the man whose dreams come true, because inevitably he finds that he had the wrong dreams. We're built to have dreams that come from evolution and actually don't come from truth about happiness. Mother Nature doesn't care if you're happy. Mother Nature wants you to survive and pass on your genes. And all of your natural impulses toward money and power and pleasure and fame and prestige and admiration, these come from Mother Nature's imperatives for you to pass on your genes and survive. And you survive through the winter. You want to be happier. You're not going to be happy because that would require no negative emotion. That's impossible. You want to be happier. And so you say, okay, I've got these impulses and I want to be happier. So therefore, if I indulge these impulses, I'll be happier. That's wrong. That's a crossed circuit.
Porn doesn't work.
Porn doesn't work.
Indulge the impulses, you're not going to be
But money doesn't work. I mean, fame doesn't work. Power doesn't work.
None of it.
These can be intermediate steps toward the things that actually do bring greater happiness, like a conscious understanding of the divine, like a relationship with your family, like close, real friendships, like serving other people through your work. In other words, love, right? Which is what brings happiness at the end of the day. And you can actually facilitate more of that more effectively with these worldly rewards. But if you stop at the worldly rewards, you're not going to get it. And the result of that is that people who are unusually good at getting those things like you're going to do that. And when you hit your mark, your money mark, your fame mark, your power mark, and you're not feeling it, you're going to conclude, I guess I needed another billion. I guess I needed more.
It's a terrible addiction, and you see it so much in the ultra wealthy. Look, if it didn't work in your first 6 million, it's not going to work in your second 6 million. I'm just
right.
I not only made it, but I lost it before I was 30.
Yeah.
It's like I took a taste of it, and I really wasn't happier when I had that much money. It was kind of nice, but
it was kind of nice. The trouble is that, the way that I teach my students about this, because my students are unbelievably talented and they're virtually all going to be well off. I mean, the Harvard Business School, they get their MBAs at Harvard, for Pete's sake. I think our average starting salary is about $210,000 coming out of their master's degree program, which is, good money. I tell them, look, your brain is going to say you will find satisfaction and it will stay if you have more. The right formula for you to have in your brain is that satisfaction equals your haves divided by your wants. Haves divided by wants. Now, we all know enough math to know that one way to increase that number is by working the numerator, but it's not very mathematically efficient. Much more efficient is always to work the denominator. If you've got a fraction, decrease the denominator if you want the number to go up, and vice versa. And that means a wants management strategy and not just a haves management strategy.
wow.
And so we have to think strivers, which is, let's just round it off to 100% of Dave Asprey's audience.
There's actually a lot of consciousness explorers in here too.
They're striving in a different plane.
You can strive for enlightenment.
Absolutely. So in the end space of different ways you can strive, and that's one of them. So every single person watching and listening to us right now needs to have a wants management strategy.
Okay. How do you do that?
Well, so there's a bunch of different ways to do that. One is to think metaphorically. So your life has been a work of self-creation to a very large extent. I mean, you're the quintessential Emersonian man. I mean, you're building your life, right? I mean, you've done it. I mean, I don't know how that works. I'm going to go figure it out and go do that, right?
Yeah, so sometimes it was a little bit more desperate than people might know, but
yeah, for sure. But it was, if your house is falling down, you're going to fix it. And, so
exactly.
So that's that's an important thing for everybody to think. How are you going to build your own life?
Mm-hmm.
But you also have to understand that that's not the only metaphor to be thinking about. So you might think of your life as you're an artist, you're a canvas, you've also got the brushes and paints, and you're painting on this canvas, and the work of art gets more and more and more beautiful. Mm-hmm. The trouble is, at 40 or 45, Dave Asprey's canvas is full, man. Mm-hmm. One more brushstroke in terms of money, power, pleasure, fame is not going to make it more beautiful. You need a new metaphor, which is a sculptor. Mm-hmm. Sculptors make things more beautiful by taking things away.
Oh, wow.
Chip, 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 wow. Chip. And the beautiful work of art is in there, and that's what should be exposed on your last day. Now, your last day is a long time from now. There's a lot of chipping, we hope, and that's the idea. That's the goal. But there's a lot of chipping that needs to get done.
I don't think I can lose any more body fat.
I know. What are you? What's your percentage?
I'm at 4.8 right now.
That's insane.
I don't know that it's even healthy. I'm trying to go back to 6.
If I get under 7, it's hard to be married to me.
I mean, I look ridiculous.
Yeah, you're very vascular at this point. Yeah. If I get under 10, I don't like my life.
Yeah, I don't know how to get fatter at this point, which is weird because I've been fat my whole life. But I finally got my nutrition dialed in, and it just works. But anyway, I'm there.
By chipping away the conceits, the possessions, the relationships that are not generative, chipping away. So one of the things that I recommend is having a reverse bucket list where you make an honest assessment of your attachments. Mm-hmm. We're all conceited. All of us, nobody is perfect. You can find, Pope Francis has conceits, right? The Dalai Lama, maybe not the Dalai Lama, but he's a living bodhisattva. But most of us and so make a list. And then, and again, it's okay. I'm not ashamed of the fact that money is fun. I'm not ashamed of the fact that I want people to buy my books. But I'm not going to be managed by those desires, because then if I am, then I'm being managed by my limbic system. Mm-hmm. Those cravings and desires are limbic in nature. I want my prefrontal cortex to be in charge. So I cross them out saying, easy come, easy go. That's how you can live according to a wants management as opposed to a haves management strategy.
I'm going to ask you a question that I'm 99% sure no one's asked you, and you can say you want to talk about it because you're from a big school. Ejaculation, prolactin, dopamine, testosterone, and motivation.
I don't know that literature. I've heard you talk about it. I've heard you talk about it a month or two ago. And that's the extent of my knowledge.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because with everything you're saying there about, you want it, you're striving, but then you get it, and then it's not what you think. Like that's kind of the will you still respect me in the morning, or what they call post-nut clarity. But that's a micro, a microcosm of a much larger cycle that we see where, you really want to sing, but then it's empty, right? And then you get back on the treadmill. And I think that's what's happening with I made my first $1 million. It's fucking great to make your first $1 million, but making your second $1 million isn't as good as the first one.
Right.
And if you just keep doing it over and over and over, you're like, the Coke addict who just keeps, I need more, I need more, I need more.
This or anything else. Look, you're talking about the hormonal balance that you're actually altering when you're finding some sort of physical satisfaction.
Yeah.
The neuromodulator activity is really interesting about this too, because we know a lot about dopamine at this point, and people misattribute dopamine. They talk about dopamine as if it were a reward chemical. It's an anticipation chemical.
Exactly.
It's a neuromodulator that says there's a reward out there, go and get it. Most of the time, by the way, you get more dopamine when you think about something you want to go get than when you actually get the thing. The only reason you get more dopamine is if it was better than you thought it was going to be. And that's the reason that most things are disappointing. And so what will happen is that you'll spend effort, you'll spend your sense of reward, satisfaction that you hope you'll get. And this is one of the things you're talking about, the sexual experience, but we can find it in all sorts of experiences in our life. So I think it's a neuromodulator matter. We have to be very cognizant of this. Now, in the case that you talked about, the old jazz musicians always talked about that. They always talked about their personal lives, their sexual lives in that particular way. Don't do it, man. No, not before the show, man.
It's true. A lot of pro athletes and Taoists. So this is one of those things, especially for younger guys. I've talked to enough of them who are usually way over involved with porn, which creates dopamine.
Oh, it's bad for you. Porn is really, really bad for you. It's bad for you. Mess up your brain. Mm-hmm. One of the biggest problems, just beside what you're doing to your dopamine system, have you had Anna Lemke on your show? She wrote Dopamine Nation. Phenomenal.
Absolutely. Yeah,
She's got the best book on this. It's really about this. She talks about pornography and about sex and about gambling and but because it's all the same system.
Exactly.
Right. And by the way, for a lot of people watching us, that's how success works.
Yes, entrepreneurship is still a slot machine.
Totally. And the truth is that a lot of people, if they're very successful, very young, life feels gray unless they're putting up numbers. And that's all about, I have the anticipation of reward, and then the reward has to be better than I thought it was going to be. And then I start all over again such that I can actually feel something in my life. But it's all the same thing. It all really comes around as the same thing.
There's an antidote for that. I wrote about it in my next book, and it's pain.
Yeah.
A brief exposure to pain
for sure.
will reset your dopamine sensitivity. That's why in biohacking, you do cryotherapy or cold plunges. It's 3 minutes that suck, but then the rest of your day is much better.
Yeah, and also it's not artificially goosing your dopamine over and over and over again. We're ingenious about taking this natural evolved system of anticipation of reward so that we'll stay in the hunt. I mean, the reason that you look up at the tree and there's a little yellow piece of fruit up there, and then you get a burst of dopamine that impels you to climb the tree and risk your life because those calories are going to be so delicious and tasty. That's how the brain is supposed to work. So you'll do stuff and stay alive and pass on your genes. But we're so good, we're so smart that entrepreneurs have been able to take that experience. And methamphetamine, for example, gives you 10x the dopamine that you're going to get under ordinary circumstances. Pornography will 2.5 times as much, something like that. I mean, there's all of these things that will artificially stimulate your dopamine in ways that are they're super physiological and they're bad for you. It messes up your dopamine system such that you get what's in my profession is called anhedonia. Yeah. Anhedonia is the inability to feel pleasure. That's because your dopamine is permanently under its baseline unless you keep artificially stimulating it.
Wow.
So what we find is that almost anything that you'll do that feels weirdly good, anything from highly glycemic carbohydrates in the middle of the afternoon to looking at internet pornography to pulling a slot machine by yourself at 4 o'clock in the morning in Vegas to taking drugs and alcohol, these are things, and by the way, some of it's innocuous. You and I like coffee. And it has all kinds of good things that, it stimulates catecholamines, all sorts of beautiful things that we like. And it's okay on the dopamine side, but most of it's bad for you.
Yeah.
And you need to fast, and you need to be conscious of what's happening in your brain, and you need knowledge to change your habits such that you can master yourself. Otherwise, you will be a slave to these processes.
I always think of everything I write, all my books, this show. If only I'd have known that when I was 19, it would have saved me pain and millions of dollars.
Maybe that's my answer to your question earlier, what I wish I knew at 20.
Yeah.
But you know what? I was an idiot. So I probably wouldn't have taken my advice. I would have said, sorry, old man.
Well, one of the secrets of why I started biohacking is I ran a longevity nonprofit group near Stanford in my 20s, and no one under 60 would ever come. And these old guys were teaching me how to make my brain work. And so I'm like, what if I rebrand longevity to make it so I would have listened early on in life? And so now what was longevity became, how do you own your brain?
Right.
And everyone wants to own their brain. And what I'm looking to get from you in this interview is, we've shared lots of different little things. So let's say, all right, you're in your senior year of college, your early 20s, and this is an overwhelming set of information. Biohacking is in just this interview. Like, what do I do first? Right. The very first step that someone does is says, all right, I want to do what Arthur's talking about.
Yeah. What's the very first thing to do? Get up before dawn. Get up an hour and 36 minutes before dawn.
An hour and 36 minutes?
I know that's weirdly, what that is twice 48, and that's called the Brahma Muhurta.
Okay.
In ancient Vedic wisdom. It sounds pretty arbitrary, perhaps it is. But the whole point is start the process right. Get a good start is what it comes down to. You will optimize your brain chemistry. You will enhance your creativity. You're more likely to engage in better habits. Get up before the sun is up, according to the ancient Vedic scholars and the most common neuroscience. So that's the first. Yeah. I'm talking about a small win, Dave. I mean, obviously, because and your work is all about small wins.
Sure.
It's all about
because I'm lazy. The small wins that stack up and they're how much work.
They turn into a big win. Yeah, they turn into big wins. You don't start with big wins, but that's actually my point. Okay, maybe it's not get up before dawn. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's, wake up and meditate or say your prayers. Maybe it is call your mother and remind yourself that you love her. Maybe it is, it's basically these basic small wins of hygiene or where you start. And ordinarily, we all kind of know what they are, but we see them as this bolus of habits and things that we all need to do together. Pick one. Pick one and do it.
Do one thing every day that makes
Yeah.
you better, and it doesn't matter.
And this will lead you to this sort of daisy chain of physiological, mental, psychological, and spiritual wellness, of betterness is what it comes down to. Other people, there's one thing that you might do is to stop being, you said something important a minute ago. Most young people today are very afraid of discomfort.
Yeah.
They're very afraid of pain, not just physical pain. They're actually even more afraid of unhappiness. So I'm a happiness specialist.
Right.
I'm really an unhappiness specialist. And what I tell my students is your suffering is unbelievably sacred. Stop trying to avoid it and eliminate it. That's one of the first things that I recommend to a lot of people is like, your pain is totally normal. If you're a student at Harvard and you're not sad and anxious, you need therapy, you know? and stop pretending as if you could have this life that doesn't have this in it. I mean, come on, man. You want to be fully alive. And that means all of it, including the bad parts, because they're not bad.
It's all just a signal. Yeah. I mean, I've been awake when they took my bone marrow out. I watched them saw through the bone in my foot and heard the bone saw slow down because my bones were too dense to easily cut.
Ouch.
And
That's amazing.
well, that was my leg was numbed.
Well, let me ask you a question on that, because I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I got to ask you this question. Some people say they want to die in their sleep. Do you?
I want to die at a time and by a method of my choosing.
I want to see it.
Yeah, totally. I'm curious about it.
I want to experience that. That's heavy, man. I mean, it's like that's like, I want to be asleep when I jump out of a plane in a parachute. No, the point is the experience, right? And if I could remember my birth, even better, but I can't. Actually, the memories exist.
Why do you say you can? You totally can.
Well, I don't have access to the memories in a form that I find that you know.
I know some people could get you there.
Okay.
And that the reason I say that is the very first personal development thing I ever did just happened to be run by the founder of the American Pre- and Perinatal Birth Psychology Association.
No kidding.
And she spotted that I had birth trauma just by the way I walked or something.
No kidding.
And she's like, "Tell me about your birth."
Like, I don't know.
I'm like, "Hospitals, vagina, yeah." Then then she led me through a regression, not hypnotic, just a breathing thing. And I remembered small details about my birth, and I called my parents. I was like, what was that? And they're, "Oh yeah. Yeah, there was a warming. I didn't know what a warming chamber was, but apparently they put me that in the hospital." So I'm like, "How did I recall details?" It's because it's mostly
Well, you're trying to actually reestablish. There's
it's in there.
the pruning that actually occurs within the first 18 months. So you still have the memories that are in the episodic memories stored in the hippocampus, but you just don't have access to them in the same way because of the synaptic pruning that happens.
have to be in an altered
first 2
stage
years.
to do it.
But to your point, I mean, you wanted to be awake when they're sawing through your bone because you wanted to see what that was like.
Yeah.
That's how you're supposed to approach life. See, you're an entrepreneur and what do you have, 13 companies?
Now, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's the least of it.
That's hard. I got to say that's too many problems.
But the real entrepreneur, the real enterprise is Dave Inc. Yeah. That's the enterprise. And every single one of us is an enterprise. And you're the entrepreneur. Treat your life as such.
Wow, that's good advice.
That's super important because, you get married. That's entrepreneurial. You give your heart away. You have a child. You take a new job. You move to a new place. This is just pure entrepreneurship is all this is. So experience that. Entrepreneurs are like, yeah, I don't want to know anything about this new company. You're a terrible entrepreneur. I mean, I want to know. The general counsel called, we're getting sued. I want to know, right? Because this is going to be less of an interesting experience, but more importantly, it's going to be less successful. So you need all of this bad stuff in your life. Furthermore, one of the things they always say in Silicon Valley, for all the stupid things that they say, one of the things that they say that's really correct is you learn more from your failure than you do from your success. And that's true in your personal life as well. If you had 5 heartbreaking, terrible romantic breakups, you're incompetent to get married.
Wow. 100% support on that one.
Because you need to learn from that. And you better be awake when that's happening. And you better take it in. And okay, go listen to some sad music.
Yeah,
but let's understand.
It feels like you're going to die if you break up with someone.
Yeah.
You won't leave an unhealthy relationship because it feels like you're going to die.
That's right. And all of that is, once again, the psychology is the biology. And the more that you can then augment that knowledge of the experience with an understanding of the neuroscience, the better off you're going to be. That's what really changed my life, is understanding first, as a behavioral scientist, what the emotions are and how they work, but then actually understanding the mechanism of causation. For example, sadness, classic, is a part of your limbic system largely dedicated to the experience of sadness and grief, the anterior cingulate cortex, the dorsal part of the anterior cingulate cortex. It's supposed to be highly activated when you're feeling mental pain, especially from exclusion. It exists so you'll have an aversion to that. Now, you can medicate it away.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, acetaminophen, Tylenol, will mute the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex. You will feel less heartbroken.
I didn't know.
Yeah.
But you'll ruin your liver. It's probably
Well,
not
if you
good trade.
if you take more than 1,000 milligrams twice a day, or you can use alcohol, or you can use opiate drugs. But the whole point is, you need to learn from that, and you will suffer less if you understand the nature of your suffering. Knowledge is power.
And if you feel the suffering fully, at least if you believe David Hawkins, it takes about 20 minutes if you have the balls to do it, which few people do. But you can process something in 3 days, or you can process it in 30 years. But the more you resist the pain, the worse it is. And
Yeah, there's a lot of research on that. There's a lot of research on pain elimination is a huge mistake. Treatment and elimination, treatment and avoidance are totally different things.
yeah.
The treatment of pain largely involves the acceptance of pain.
Yep.
That the first step in the treatment of any pain is acceptance of it, whether it's mental or physical. The elimination or avoidance of pain is what way too much therapy is trying to do today. And what a lot of people are doing when they treat themselves, because they're being fed the lie that pain is abnormal and evidence of pathology.
Yeah. Resilience is the ability to handle some pain and let it flow through you and be done with it and move on. Yeah. And also not do what I would do in my 20s, which was ignore the pain until, there's a bone sticking out. It's probably dumb too.
That's dumb too. I mean, we have to be realistic about it, of course, and no doubt you have a very, very high pain threshold.
I certainly do now.
Yeah, no, that's right. And actually coming to a healthy relationship with that without, you recognize that it's uncomfortable but it's absolutely normal, and you want to treat it in the best way where you can learn the most, and you don't have to live with it forever. I mean, this is common sense to a certain extent, yet there's so much of that is elusive these days.
Here's an upgrade for you for stress and energy. It's the Leela Quantum Tech. Their products use quantum energy to boost your energy, lower stress, and give you control over your body. Stress is a major part of aging, so when you manage your stress, you can live longer. Multiple studies show that Leela Quantum's products neutralize the effect of harmful EMFs on your body, improve blood circulation, and enhance your heart rate variability. They've even shown a 20 to 29% increase in ATP production, and that's your body's energy source. It's backed by over 15 placebo-controlled studies. The technology works. Ready to feel better and upgrade your performance? Go to LeelaQ, LeelaQ.com/Dave and get a special 10% discount.
I was on stage at an event a while ago with a Navy SEAL doctor, and one of the audience members said, for each of you on the panel, what is the thing you struggle with the most? And I thought about it. I said, I don't believe in struggle. Right? Struggle is resistance. Right? There's things where I fail. There's things that I'm working really hard on, but struggling is like wriggling around when there's something's happening versus just either working on it or not working on it.
Right.
So to me, struggle feels like wasted effort because of pain.
Yeah.
Instead of, look, I did everything I could and I absolutely failed and it hurt, but I didn't struggle. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, no.
What is the role of pain in struggle?
Well, there's the Buddhists always talk about non-resistance, the whole idea of non-resistance. And resistance is the biggest problem that we have when we have a lot of pain, because when resisting the pain is what actually leads to the struggle, and that exacerbates the problem and doesn't actually lead to effective treatment. That's basically what we're talking. It's sort of Western terms. That's what more or less what the Buddhists are saying in this idea of non-resistance. That doesn't mean that you acquiesce to it. When something is incredibly painful, you don't acquiesce to the pain. On the contrary, but you're not going to resist it. You're not going to say, no, make it stop. I mean, and what am I learning? What's happening? How do I treat it? I accept it. And now actually, how am I going to treat it? In other words, the question shouldn't be, what do you struggle most with? What's the biggest effort for you to make a gain in your life that's not easy?
Yeah. What's the hardest thing you're working on?
Yeah.
What's the most difficult challenge? I'll do that all the
Of course, because that's your life, is doing hard things.
Yeah.
Because you're super into hard things, because you're a striver, for better or for worse. I mean, you could be a happier person if you weren't.
What's the recipe for being a happy striver?
So I wrote a whole book on that called From Strength to Strength. And I got interested in this because I had this personal experience that really changed my thinking. I was a CEO at the time. I was running a big nonprofit research organization, a think tank in Washington, D.C. called the American Enterprise Institute. Great job. Very interesting. High pressure, 80 hours a week. And I started thinking, well, 5 or 6 years into that job, what's the end game? Which is what CEOs are always thinking, because you do it a little bit better. Life is about progress, build more buildings, raise more money. And then at some point, what? I mean, you get the shove from the board and go golf. I mean, what?
And then you die about 6 months later.
I don't want to get a deep tan. I don't want to go. I don't want to golf. I don't want to do that. But I didn't know what the end game was. I was very, very insecure about that. And one night, when I was kind of in the midst of this minor existential crisis, I was on a plane from LA to DC, which is I've been on the road since I was a kid. And so this is pretty typical, typing away on my laptop, and I overheard a conversation behind me. It was a couple. It was an elderly couple. I could tell it was a man and a woman. And his words were muffled, but her responses were not. Very penetrating, coming right from the seats. I'm assuming it's a married couple. Turns out it was. He says, and she says, don't say it would be better if you were dead. And then he says, and she says, it's not true that nobody remembers you or loves you anymore. And I'm thinking, oh, this poor disappointed old guy, he's in his 80s. He's no Dave Asprey. I mean, or he's no Striver. I mean, he probably wanted to do stuff, but didn't have the incentive, didn't have the impulse, didn't have the drive, the work effort. And now it's too late. Made sense to me. When we landed at Dulles an hour later or so, I kind of wanted to put a face to it, because this is my lab. I'm a behavioral scientist. And my lab is overheard conversations, right? And so I stand up and I turn around, and it's one of the most famous men in the world. Yeah. This is somebody that everybody watching and listening to us knows, a real hero for stuff he did a long, long time ago. And I thought to myself, either the model of pure striverly success is busted, or this guy's busted. And I started a research project, because this is coming. I mean, this guy's 20x what I'm ever going to do. But I don't want to be having that conversation with my wife in 30 or 40 years on the plane, because my adventure ended. So I started a research project to see if this was normal, which it is.
Very normal.
Very normal. And as a matter of fact, the people who are most likely to become unhappier after 70 are the people who have the biggest party in their careers before 70. That's a big problem for pretty much your whole audience, unless you break the mold, unless you do a few things differently than what people do who are on autopilot for worldly success. And that's what the book is about. What do they actually do? One is understanding your brain, what we've talked about before, getting on the crystallized intelligence curve, where you're not just trying to be an innovator, you're trying to be a synthesizer of information. So if you're a hotshot lawyer at 30, you should be managing partner at 60. That's the teacher version. If you're a startup entrepreneur at 35, you should be a VC at 65, because then you're the teacher, the coach, the talent spotter. I was doing, mathematical, empirical social science that was so sophisticated at 35, I can't read the articles today. Wow. Now I have an audience of 500,000 readers a week in The Atlantic, and I'm talking about science for non-scientists, because I'm not using that fluid intelligence of innovation. I'm using the crystallized intelligence of synthetic wisdom and public education. That's super important. The second is the chipping away. The second skill that people who are happy strivers, as they get older, is they stop adding and they start learning how to subtract. So they get to their essence. And the third, which is let's say third and fourth. Third is that they're serious about their relationships. One of the problems that strivers have is they're lonely.
Yep.
They're lonely, and they think that polishing their leaves is the way to go. Is know your roots, and your roots are intertwined. Get on that. Then last is your spiritual life, or your philosophical life. Yeah. What do you understand about the transcendent, the things that are bigger than you? What do you understand about, maybe it's like our friend Ryan Holiday lives here in town. He studies the Stoics. Great. Yeah. Maybe you're practicing Vipassana meditation. Maybe you're, like me, practicing a faith of your youth. You need to be doing something, because you need to be talking seriously about the why of your life when you're in your mature years. So these are the big four: crystallized intelligence, chipping away, roots, not leaves, and the transcendent. Those are the big four, people who get happier and happier and happier, even though they're strivers. And that's exactly what the guy on the plane was not doing.
Wow. I've had a lot of people ask throughout interviews, what do you want your legacy to be?
Yeah.
And it always struck
What do
me
you
as,
tell them?
always struck me as absurd. I'm like, I don't want a legacy. Like when I'm dead, I'll be doing something else, or maybe I'll just be dead. Depends on whatever you believe. I'm on beliefs on that. But it's none of my business. I don't have any expectation anyone's going to know my name 100 years from now. Right. In fact, if you're a president of the U.S. 100 years ago, do you know who that was?
What year was that? 1924, Calvin Coolidge?
You actually know? Nerd. But the 19% are like, who knows? And what did Coolidge do in his top 3 things? Unless you studied history, it doesn't fucking matter. Right? So people ask that, like, I would like my kids, as long as they're alive, to be like, hey, he was a good dad.
Yeah.
You know, I like my closest friends to say, you know, he loved, he loved me and he was kind. I don't care. Like, I'm not doing it for that.
Right.
I think the why behind what motivates you. But if, you know, your definition of, you know, success in your old age is everyone remembering your work.
Yeah.
It just feels empty.
Have you interviewed Stephen Cave, the philosopher at Cambridge, who wrote this really great book called Immortality?
Wow, I have to interview that.
Oh, you'd love it. Okay. Love it. So I don't know him personally, but I've read the book. It's a great book. And he talks about the fact that people think about immortality in different ways. There's also a book called The Consolations of Mortality by a philosopher at the University of Toronto. That's also very, very good. That's newer. That talks about, you know, Kurzweil and how he's trying to, you know, the singularity and all this kind of stuff. But the Cave book is more conventional in the way that it deals with philosophy. And it talks about how the ancients had a very strong sense of immortality through legacy. And the best example of this is the legend of Achilles. So Achilles is obviously a mythological figure, but he has a choice of either retiring to his farm and having a happy life or surely dying in battle and being remembered forever as a hero. And he takes door number 2 because he wants to live forever. And that's really, really what it meant. We as moderns, individuals, we kind of see our legacy. We see the memory of other people, if we're realistic, as kind of stopping at the end of our lives. And so we have a different attitude about that. Now, I think it also takes a lot of humility to recognize the reality of this too. You have 8 great-grandparents. What are their names? Do you know?
Let's see. Nope.
Yeah.
Met one of them when I was really young.
I know one, Folker Hansen.
Yeah.
Because I've heard about him again and again and again and again and again. I can't name my great-grandparents, and my great-grandchildren are not going to be able to remember. They're not, even my great-grandchildren are not going to know my name. I mean, except under weird circumstances.
I have a book somewhere. With all
they do genealogy or something, or you know, somebody finds one of my old books and dusts it off and reads it. It's going to be some weird thing like that, but it's not. It's trivial, is what that's going to be. And so the result is kind of a healthy humility. What am I doing now? And that's a mindfulness about your own life. You know, for me, I want to lift people up and bring them together in bonds of happiness and love using science and ideas right now.
Yeah.
Right now. That's, and I sort of think you want that too.
We're very aligned on that. And it's not because I want to be a big deal. I had erased my identity because I'm a computer hacker. I was happily anonymous.
Did you really?
Oh, yeah.
You became...
You couldn't tell what state I lived in. My car was registered through a shell company. Like it was a game. Like, it's not like I had anything, but I'm like, I'm a hacker.
And you weren't on the internet.
I know I was on the
internet.
You sure are now. I helped to build the internet. I was on the internet, but none of the info about me was accurate. Like it was fun. It's much harder today because of facial recognition, but it was like a game.
My wife's from Spain, and she thinks that we Americans are all, you know, in our hearts, we're just like frontier cowboys that want to just like take off and a man with no name kind of deal. And we all secretly want to be in the witness protection program.
Wow. I don't know if I would do that now. There probably are times in my life where I would have said, sure, that sounds like plan. Like, let's just hit reset. But it's a weird thing when I hear, you know, a teenager say, I want to be an influencer. I'm like, why would you want that?
It's because of the biological imperative. Of course, this is pure evolution. You want to rise in the hierarchy in your kin group. The problem with that is that now we're able to supercharge that into something that's utterly, I mean, as dangerous as fentanyl.
It's crack.
You know, fentanyl to natural endorphins is the internet to the natural amount of prestige that we can get inside a 30-person kin group.
Wow.
And it's as dangerous and as bad for you. And fame is terrible.
It is incredibly toxic, and I've dealt with that and interviewed guests about it. And to make it a goal, it seems like it's about the same as saying, I want to be a porn star in terms of a career goal. Like if fame emerges from you doing what you love that you think is helping other people, cool.
Right.
But if you do it for that reason, I think it's incredibly toxic.
Completely. It's like getting high to be high. I mean, it's the same thing. What you're trying to do is to juice your brain chemistry. And anytime you're actually trying to get physiologically out of the lane of where your brain chemistry is supposed to lie for your health and well-being, you're going to get less health and well-being.
I have a kind of a little trick that listeners, I think, are going to appreciate based on something you said before. You said a lot of the most ultra successful, impactful people in the world after 70, they're unhappy because people don't know their work. The reason I'm here today is that in my 20s, I had all the diseases of aging.
Right.
So I hung out with people in their 70s and 80s who were reversing their aging.
Right.
Those are those people. These are people who were the masters of their fields, who were so happy to tell me everything for free. Right. And to this day, some of my great friends are in their 70s and 80s, and they teach me so much.
Right.
And for listeners, if you're in your 20s and you want to see something amazing, find someone who's written an incredible book 40 years ago that changed the world and look them up, and they'll probably just have coffee with you because you know who they are and you're interested in their work, and they will tell you lifetimes of knowledge for free.
It's unbelievable.
And it's a gift.
Oh, it's great. And I'll give you an example of this where I think the same way. I remember when my dad died in my 30s, and he died pretty young.
Yeah.
And he was a wonderful man. I loved him. But he wasn't very happy. And I thought, okay, what am I going to do differently? Right? Because this is one of the great gifts you can give to your children too. And I said, what am I? So I started doing a lot of things differently than he did. I stopped drinking alcohol, for example, which people should, pretty much everybody should consider. But I also started exercising seriously and learning about actually how my body and brain and mood cycles worked, and from exercise. And so I started doing resistance training before there was a resistance training revolution.
Good man.
So for me, this is more than 25 years ago. I've been working out an hour a day for 25 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
You ever hear of overtraining?
Well, I'm actually, so what I'm doing is, depending on what I have going on, it's a combination of zone 2 cardio and high interval, intensity interval training, and also resistance training that never more than 30 to 2 days a week, the whole 60 minutes is, so I'm careful about it. But here's actually the point. When I first started doing that, I thought to myself, could be hard on my body. And I know enough to know that it could be hard, especially on my joints and tendons. So I started going to old iron gyms whenever I was on the road, which is a lot of the time. And I would go find the oldest dude who was still in shape. It'd be like the 75-year-old, gym rat.
Like Bobby Kennedy?
Yeah. And he's like, but except not necessarily, on TRT. Somebody who, because back in those days, that was a lot less normal to actually be using using androgenic drugs. So it would be a guy who's like all tendons and I would go up to him and I would ask for advice. The 75-year-old guys will give you whatever you need. And I said, when I'm 75, I want to be you. Tell me what you did to not get hurt. Tell me what you did to stay strong.
So brilliant.
Right? And just do what they did. I mean, remember that back in the Senate in the old days, Strom Thurmond was like 94 years old in the Senate. And the second oldest guy was Bob Dole, because he was only like 88.
Right.
And people used to say to Bob Dole, how do you stay so young and sharp? He says, I follow Strom Thurmond around and do whatever he does. Strom's eating a carrot. I'm going to eat a carrot. But that's basically, it's not a bad idea, because the empirical regularities you see with people who are already successful, maybe through luck, maybe they just happen to do things right. Do what they do. I mean, it's just get data.
Spoken like a true professor at Harvard.
Gather data and act according to it. Yeah, exactly.
Wow. The American Enterprise Institute.
Yeah.
You're kind of a champion of individual freedom.
Yep.
Yet a lot of happiness comes from our connection to other humans.
Right.
Which is less individual. How do you reconcile individual, I stand against whatever I'm standing against, with I'm a part of a community and I've got to appease?
Yeah. I'm really all about voluntary community and not forced community. And there's a certain amount of forced community that we need, because we actually, I don't think any of us wants zero government.
Yeah.
The problem is when the state starts to substitute for what we're doing voluntarily as individuals.
Yeah.
And if we are in the witness protection program, it's going to actually be isolating and depressing. I recommend family life, I'm all about kids and marriage and, belonging to civic organizations and churches and all these wonderful things. But I really don't want the government in that. And that's really what it comes down to. What we know is that, the people, for example, are happiest when they feel like they're earning their success. And that means you need a free enterprise system. You need a system that's going to reward a guy like you. There's no government program that said, I think I'm going to lift up Dave Asprey. If we were living in a pure socialist society, you'd have nothing, because there's nothing that you're doing that would have been rewarded. There would be no signals that could have come from the state.
If we were in a pure socialist society, there would be a smoking rubble of the building I took out, and I'd be gone.
Yeah, it would be.
And there's enough people like me that socialism never works.
You're a threat. Because these individual ideas that are inflecting and weird and the people want to try it, that requires an emergent order, that requires a distributed wisdom that can only come from these systems. So I love community. I love people banding together. I love the solidarity that comes from it. I just want it to be voluntary.
Okay. I fully share your perspective there. You can only have one: censorship or misinformation.
Misinformation.
I agree. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. Thank God we don't have to choose entirely.
I'm like, if misinformation was a thing in the days of Galileo, I think the sun would still be orbiting around the Earth. So
Yeah, it was misclassified. It was fake news about fake news.
Yeah,
and that's
exactly.
often the case.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I support that idea of ability to be stupid and wrong.
Yeah, and what we need to be is discerning individuals, and we have to have the courage to be able to stand up to people and say they're stupid and wrong without them canceling us and taking our jobs away and hurting us.
Sounds almost like all of human society except for the last 10 or 15 years.
Well, it's weird because you go back not too long ago, and unfortunately,
McCarthyism?
yeah, well, even before, most of human society, we would be, the Enlightenment is great because the whole idea of the Enlightenment is that coercion to get somebody to think like you is not the best, and bargaining is not always optimal, but persuasion is awesome.
Yeah.
And Enlightenment is really all about persuasion, and that's what gets screwed up when we have an environment of censorship. And so I believe in free speech.
Is it possible to have happiness without free speech?
We never will have completely free speech. So, for example, I don't recommend that anybody listening to us, you should never, never, never lie to your spouse. But you don't need to say every single thing that's true all the time. And there are certain things, there are certain boundaries on the way that you talk about things. And so you should curb the freedom of your own speech strategically in such a way that you can cultivate your love relationships. Happiness is love, and everything else is subservient to that. And that requires a kind of prudential judgment. And there's no legalistic way to get around that. The prudential judgment comes from being a mature individual and living in the world. That's kind of sounds like a hedge, Dave, and I don't mean it to be a hedge.
Yeah.
It's just that there's nothing.
So you're saying you have free speech, but if you're dumb enough to speak freely, it might cost you your happy relationship.
Yeah, I can do that. Absolutely. I want free speech to be legal. Absolutely. But I don't want to use every right that I have in every single situation.
But no, most of the rights are for extremes. There's the reason you need to protect them.
There's all kinds of things. It's weird, right? Because there are things that are impermissible, but I want them to be legal. I want adultery to be completely legal, and I want it to be totally morally impermissible.
There you go. There's a difference between legal and moral.
Exactly right. And moral is more important in real life.
It is. Exactly.
Yeah.
And people, you make your choices and you bear the cost. One of the things that surprisingly helped me with happiness is one of the 4 agreements, integrity in your word, which is that you don't tell any lies, even the smallest ones. At least you don't do it if you're aware you're doing it.
Right.
So I no longer say, I can't pick you up at the airport.
Right.
I say, I'm not going to pick you up at the airport because I could. If I blew up my day, I skip an interview with Arthur Brooks. And, So just being truthful has freed up a huge amount of information.
Right.
I don't have any internal resistance. I have to track a bunch of bullshit I would have told people. What's the role of truthfulness and happiness from your perspective?
It's super important. Truthfulness is incredibly important. Now, again, people use truth as a weapon all the time. People say, no, I just don't lie. You have a fat butt. That's unhelpful, right?
You don't have to say everything.
You don't have to say every true thing all the time, but you shouldn't lie, is what it comes down to. And that requires skillfulness, and it requires sensitivity, and it requires compassion.
Yeah, relationship skills and everything.
But I'll give you an example of how important this is for happiness. A lot of people think that empathy is a wonderful virtue.
It's not.
Empathy is simply feeling somebody else's pain, and it can disable you and make you untruthful toward others. The real virtue that you want is compassion, because compassion is to understand somebody's pain, not be disabled by it, being truthful and doing what needs to get done, notwithstanding the resistance that you face. That's what compassion is. And that's why great leaders are usually not very empathetic, but they're incredibly compassionate. And that's what we need to be as parents. And that's what we need to be. That's what I need to be as a professor. That's what I need to be as a man walking about this world, in my view. And that's an example of this, where I am much happier when I'm compassionate. I'm much unhappier when I'm excessively empathetic.
Yeah.
And the compassion part is what it does is it layers on the truth and the integrity to my word, as you put it, in the life that I want to live.
Wow. Very, very beautifully said. And you've led such an interesting path. You've changed a lot of lives. Arthur Brooks, website is arthurbrooks.com. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you. You have my admiration. Thank you for what you're doing to make the world better, Dave.
Likewise.
See you next time on the Human Upgrade Podcast.